Welcome to The Crap and the Crazy with Tash Critter. Tash owns Little Wooden Toy Box and is mother of two teens, both with autism, ADHD and PDA. 10 years in early intervention, working with the kids' OTs, speechies and psychologists has given Tash unique insight into understanding difficult behaviours and why they occur, as well as understanding how emotional regulation and sensory input impacts us and our behaviour. This insight has helped Tash design and implement resources and coping strategies to make home life calmer and more organised. Join Tash as she talks about day-to-day life with autism, the sucky bits and the wins, plus tips for enjoying life despite the challenges.
Hello, in episode 6 I want to cover silent meltdowns, so understanding that not all meltdowns are loud and screamy and crying, that some kids will have meltdowns, and this presumably comes with the selective mutism and those kids that shut down. So recognizing a kid that shut down is not okay. Just because they're not screaming, it doesn't mean that they're coping well. And this may look like, and for my girl, it looks like she will just stop dead as a tin soldier, so her hands will go straight down by her sides, her whole body will stay still, and her whole face will stay still. She'll have no facial expression, and she has shut down. She is not coping with the world just because she's quiet. Again, same as when someone is screaming, she's not in a place to think logically or to reason or to have a discussion. And just being aware that meltdowns can present very differently, but internally they can look very much the same. And some people look at these kids and think they are fine, and they're really not. Whereas you look at someone screaming, clearly they're not fine, yes? But you look at someone that is shut down, and just because they're quiet, they can often get ignored or go under the radar. We also see in these kids an ability to mask and mirror other behaviors, and this seems to be more in girls than in boys. And look, I'm talking from my everyday life experience as a parent with a kid that does mask and mirror and has the silent meltdowns, and then I've got the other very loud one, punches the walls and whatnot. You know where he stands. Having a kid with the silent meltdowns is really hard to parent because there's just zero communication. At least when someone is screaming and angry, then there's a bit more going on there. There's there was a trigger and there was a response. Whereas with a silent meltdown, you often don't even see the trigger or the build up of those behaviors. So with a kid that can more outwardly express how they're feeling, like my boy, you get the fists, you get the stiff arms, covering the ears. If the noise is too loud, his body will start to get agitated. He'll do it used to be called the toilet dance, but there's an anxiety kind of dance as well they do. So you can see in him set behaviors that are leading and showing that he's escalating, which will result in a meltdown. With my girl, tends not to have these triggers. And I mentioned masking and mirroring before. So masking is when they, again, my experience as a parent, not as a therapist. So if you go and look up this further, you may find, less information on it. But my point there is, that masking is behaving like everyone else in the situation to blend in, or doing the absolute minimum to make things look okay, or lying's a big one, and I'm not entirely sure that they see it or process it as lying, as opposed to I'm going to say this to shut down this conversation to get me out of this situation. So it's more a survival thing than a manipulative thing. Does that make sense? And again, this is just what I've noticed throughout the years with my girl and other kids that we've worked with and other people on the spectrum as well. It's not my research by any means. And another one, that mirroring, so copying other people in the situation to take focus away from them as well, to just blend in with everyone else because they're not sure what to do. They don't have the social skills. They're more like survival skills to get through the situation. Can you imagine how exhausting this would be for these kids? So they're not acting in and fitting in because of them and their personality. They're trying to read the situation. They're trying to copy other people to fit in. You can also imagine how as they get older, this can lead them into quite difficult social situations, yeah? And situations that they're not entirely sure how to get out of. So I guess as parents as well, and this is why we do the speech therapy, the psychotherapy, everything else, to get those strategies to teach them very explicitly how to get out of these situations, what we say in these situations. We'll often see these kids are scripted as well. A lot of kids with autism are, because they've been specifically taught what to say in a situation, and they'll often say that in every situation. Yeah, gone a bit off track with the silent meltdowns. Just because your kid has silent meltdowns doesn't mean they will always have silent meltdowns. Yeah, one episode, day, morning, whatever it was, ingrained in my head was, I don't know whether it was a Christmas shopping day. I'm guessing it was something extra I had to get done. And I had both my kids, so they must have been under 2 and 4. Or around 2 and 4. I remember having my girl in the stroller pram thing. So she wasn't a little baby. She was bigger by then. And she was angry at me again. I don't know what I did. Don't remember what it was. And you often didn't know. I still don't know half the time when she's angry at me as to why. But yeah, again, that's our everyday life. But this particular time, she had kicked off her sandals. So it was summer. She had flipped her feet upside down and she was under the pram, and I was pushing the pram and she was going along the floor, scraping all the skin off her feet because she was angry at me. That was a part of how a meltdown looked for her. Continuing on that day, I had, because the two kids were trying to kill each other as well. So I had her in a trolley. I had my boy sitting in the top bit of the trolley where you put your kid facing you. And I had to put her in the stroller in the trolley facing the other way because there was only one of me and two of them. And she was trying to rip my eyes out, like my eyes out of my face. She would grab your skin and she would dig her nails in and she'd twist it and pull it. So that's the only way I could contain her and keep my skin on my face and the skin on my other child. And oh, look, there was probably screaming. She wasn't so much of a screamer. I don't know whether my boy was having a meltdown at that point or I don't ever. This is one good thing that works for us. If my girl is having a meltdown or not coping well, my boy actually really pulls himself together. And the other way around. I tend not to have both having a meltdown at the same time. In saying that, in those early years where my boy was screaming so much, so he's 2 years, almost 2 years older than my girl, and the 3 hours of screaming, 20 minutes break, 3 hours of screaming all day, every day, she was born into that. And she started talking at 8 months, hadn't progressed by 18, but you look at what she was born into, all that screaming, and you wonder, would she be different if that hadn't happened? And look, as a parent, I've only got the two. There are other families out there with more than 2 kids with autism. And you put out the biggest fire first, which was the screaming. And there was no way we could function in that house. Well, we had to learn, I suppose, but where you could, you would do what you could to reduce the screaming, yeah? And that often meant that my girl, she would sit there quite quietly, but you didn't get a lot out of her. That's really only changed in the last few years. And again, that just comes with that shutdown and selective mutism territory. And again, why I said it was hard as well, like with the kid that can express how they're feeling, you kind of know where you stand. But a kid that shuts down, there is that zero communication. There is not a lot to work with. And as a parent, that's really hard to deal with as well. And looking back now, would she have been different if she wasn't putting up with that screaming all day, if I wasn't constantly dealing with him? She was still there, she was still fed, she was a part of our lives, she was always there, but she was always there with her brother screaming. And whether it would look any different if she, didn't experience that in, well, I can't even say early years. It's been our lives really. And then as my boy has grown up, and it's taken a long time, but the meltdowns, as he started to get into teenage years, turned into rage, which is different. Again, that's just a level up from the meltdowns. And that was not so, look, that is hard to deal with, but to see in an older kid when they are more aware of their behavior and they can't help their behavior, but that guilt and that shame that comes with it, that's really hard to deal with. Again, I've gone off track, but with my girl in these last few years, now that she's gone into these teenage years, she's needed so much more time and energy from me that now I'm seeing behaviors come out in my boy because he's not in the spotlight all the time. Does that make sense? Like, this is just parenting. The way it is, you can judge me if you want. It doesn't really make much difference to our lives. But I hope, for those of you that are going through this as well, to be okay with not being everything for everyone, even when it's your kids as well. You do your best. Don't you? You do the best with what you know. And I'm learning every day still with my kids. And, teenage years are just a whole nother ball game. Don't stress about that now. If you're in those younger years, know that what you are learning, what you are putting into your kids now in the younger years is a massive investment. Yeah. And you will see that, even though you may not see it right now, you will see that later and it will pay off. And, I'm just going to stop on the teenage years. So as far as tools and strategies for silent meltdowns, they actually look very similar to if your kid is having a loud screaming meltdown. So finding a safe, calm place for them to de-escalate, to just be, I guess it's just reducing all that sensory input, all the demands, so lowering your expectations as far as conversation goes. So just because they're not being loud and screaming and crying doesn't mean they're processing. So recognizing that they have hit that shutdown point, it's not the time for discussion, it's not the time for talking about behaviors or talking about a situation, how it could have been managed better or whatever else. You just leave that. And for some kids, that looks like an hour later after they've calmed down, or it could be 5 hours later. In our house, it's 6 hours later for my boy and tends to be never for my girl, depending on the situation. But headphones, so the noise cancelling headphones to just take out that audio, a darkened room, candles may work. Now look, that depends on the age of your kid, yeah. Whether you get LED ones or just soft lighting in the room probably would have been a better thing to say there. Fluffy blankets, weighted blankets. With my girl, depending on the situation, what has happened, how she is responding, I will use body weight, so a hug or sit on her, or use the weighted blanket. Again, for some kids, that will make things worse. I was saying in the last episode with my boy, I would, push him a little bit further to blow up the volcano. So the meltdown was going to happen, whether it happened now or in 3 hours' time. It was just a miserable 3 hours waiting for it versus we get it over and done with. I tend to not use that strategy with my girl. She just doesn't work that way. And that's going to be different for you and your relationship with each kid and how they respond, their sensory profile, their sensory preferences, sensory aversions, and the works there. I think I've covered most of the senses there. If you want more information on this as far as strategies go, I actually go into that in detail in our emotional regulation and sensory profile course training pack. So you get all the printed resources for you to train you up on what sensory profiles are, what sensory processing difficulties look like, meltdowns, tantrums, the works, understanding that, different emotions sit differently on an emotional spectrum at both ends, even excitement and the rage or irate at the other end, both ends are out of control, what to do, what not to do. And yeah, just tips, strategies, advice, my 2 cents worth from my 10 years and going experience. Yeah, I will leave it at that for today. The next episode is going to be about poop. We have lots of poop stories. And yeah, okay, I will talk to you soon. Bye.